everyone. My name is Mike Goddard. I'm retired refuge manager with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm here today to talk to you about careers in the Fish and Wildlife Service. For those of you that are unfamiliar with wildlife refuges, I'd like to go ahead and give a brief introduction to them. There are over 500 national wildlife refuges throughout the country, from the coast or from the Florida up to Alaska, from the coast of Maine out to the coast of California and all the way out into the Pacific. There are refuges in every state. And the refuges are primarily designed to support waterfowl or to support wildlife, and show you some of the wildlife that they support. Waterfowl refuges such as Quivira in Kansas support large numbers of waterfowl, ducks, geese, and swans. Some of the desert game ranges support desert bighorn sheep such as Cabeza Prieta out in Arizona. Also, National Elk Refuge, we have bison and elk protected in there. Aransas Refuge is an endangered species home for wintering whooping cranes, a 50,000 acre refuge on the Gulf Coast of Texas. Crystal River in Florida is a spring-fed, very clear river system that supports manatees, which are ocean mammals, sea mammals. And other refuges such as Kodiak in Alaska protect brown bears, or as you might know them as grizzly bears. And up in the Arctic Refuge in Alaska, we have large numbers of these caribou, and here's very large herds of caribou up on the Arctic plains. And when you get out into the Pacific, we have some refuges out there, some of the small islands and atolls, such as Midway, that provide nesting habitat, critical nesting habitat for birds such as albatross and for green sea turtles. So let's talk about the jobs that are out there on the wildlife refuges. The first one I want to talk about is a wildlife refuge manager. And that position has overall responsibility for managing the refuge and the activities that occur on the refuge. To help the manager do that, we have refuge biologists, we have outdoor recreation planners, we have refuge law enforcement officers, and we have fire management officers. So I want to talk about those jobs on refuges. Each of these jobs have educational requirements to get started in them. To be fully in the jobs, you need to have a 4-year degree or better. To get started in these series, you can get started as a GS3 or a 4 with a couple of years of college under your belt. The fire management area, now you can get started in that without college degree, but once you start, can only move up so far before you need to have a college degree for the upper management positions in fire. Now, all of these positions are on refuges, but when you get to the top of these professions or careers, you may very well find yourself serving in a regional office as a supervisory law enforcement officer, or as a supervisory outdoor rec planner, or supervisory biologist. So you can move above the field level to the regional office level. So what are the things that we do on wildlife refuges? We manipulate habitat mostly. We farm, we mow, we do a lot of burning and grazing. Water control. We also work directly with wildlife, as you can see over here on the right. We're doing wildlife surveys, captive rearing, reintroducing species, and research. And increasingly, we have to spend a lot of time controlling invasive species, both plant and animal, on refuges. So those are the activities that the staff engage in on refuges. We do allow the public to come on most refuges. There are a few that are totally closed to the public, but most of them are open either fully or partially to the public. Now, the outdoor activities we allow include hunting and fishing, environmental education, wildlife photography, wildlife observation, and interpretation. So these activities we allow the public to engage in, and they're all oriented towards the outdoors and wildlife. So I want to start now talking about the various jobs in the refuge series. Let's start with the wildlife refuge manager job. This was the job that I did for 29 years. And the first refuge manager was a gentleman named Paul Krogel at Pelican Island Refuge in 1903. That was the first refuge that was established. So I got started as a manager while attending school at New Mexico State University. I was working on a degree in wildlife and fisheries and was accepted into their cooperative education program. And I did 2 tours, as you might call them, as a co-op education student, one at Wichita Mountains Refuge in Oklahoma, and the second one at San Andreas Refuge in New Mexico. At this stage in your career, you're a prospective employee to the service, and they're exposing you to as many of the different programs on refuges to introduce you to refuges and how they function and the staff that it takes to run them. So Wichita Mountains is a large refuge, lots going on, and I worked with the maintenance, with the biology, with the livestock handler, with the fire crew and the law enforcement, although I didn't supervise anybody. I also emptied trash and ran the Youth Conservation Corps program. At San Andreas, my second co-op ed student, I tracked radio collared bighorn sheep in the mountains. So I spent a year at Tishomingo and then moved to a refuge manager trainee position. I'm sorry, a year at a 6-month assignment, a co-op assignment at San Andreas. I finished up my degree and became a GS5 refuge manager trainee at Tishomingo Refuge in Oklahoma, a waterfowl refuge where we did a lot of farming, about 600 acres a year, and a lot of water level manipulation to support waterfowl during their migration. So I spent a year there, again, emptying trash, doing just sort of low-level jobs, but working with the maintenance staff, working with the biologist, learning the ropes pretty much. So they assigned me after a year to Aransas Refuge, again, a refuge manager trainee position. Endangered whooping cranes, alligators, javelinas, wild hogs. It was quite a good place to work, a big program there. Again, working with other staff members, the Tom Stain, the whooping crane biologist, with the law enforcement staff and with the maintenance staff. Although I did get a couple of assignments managing grazing on the Tatton unit and things like that, sort of to give you some additional experience and responsibilities. So after 2.5 years there, I transferred, applied for a job at Cabeza Prieta as an assistant refuge manager. And I was there. It was a large refuge, very small staff. So it was a manager, myself, and 2 maintenance men and an administrative officer. So essentially you are the biologist, you are the outdoor rec planner, you are the law enforcement program. So as a big refuge, small staff. My second job as an assistant was at Buenos Aires Refuge in southern Arizona. We were reintroducing masked bobwhite quail. Now this was a refuge, had a large staff, big biology program to do the reintroduction, a big fire program because it was 120,000 acres of grassland. So I worked with those and supervised the maintenance and law enforcement programs on the refuge. I finished out my career as the refuge manager at Stillwater Refuge in Nevada, a Great Basin marsh supporting shorebirds, waterfowl, and pelicans. And in the wintertime, up to 1,500 tundra swans would come down and spend the winter with us. So as the manager, you pretty much have a deputy or an assistant refuge manager doing the day-to-day operations on the refuge. And you're pretty much left free to deal with issues from outside the refuge, things such as military overflights, invasive species, pollution, border issues. The 2 southern Arizona refuges were right on the border. So you have to deal with a lot of those issues, but you also have the opportunity to work with other groups and agencies to do good things for wildlife, such as the First Nations, other federal agencies, state wildlife departments, and other private conservation groups, such as Arizona Desert Bighorn Sheep Society. So let's talk about the refuge biology job now. So you might start out in this career path as a biological technician. You're out doing a lot of sampling and surveys, doing vegetation transects, recording data on waterfowl and other wildlife. You might be out monitoring the water level in your marsh, such here as at Bandon. You might be out on Breton Island Refuge counting shorebirds on the beach. You could be at Yukon Delta operating a cannon net and banding wood ducks. You could also be doing a reintroduction program at Midway Atoll where they're reintroducing Laysan ducks. So you could be out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean working with wildlife. Archie Carr Refuge in Florida is home to leatherback turtles, and you could find yourself monitoring nesting sites on the beach in Florida. You could be out on the Oregon coast counting and monitoring California sea lions here on some of the offshore islands. At Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge, the biologists there are monitoring and maintaining the Devil's Hole pupfish population. And at St. Catherine Creek Refuge in Louisiana, the refuge biologists are working with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries in reintroducing and monitoring alligator gar, which is a large prehistoric looking river fish. In Brazoria Refuge, you could find yourself up in a small fixed wing aircraft flying the coast, counting waterfowl in the wetlands below. If you're at Cabeza Prieta or Desert National Wildlife Refuge, you, as a biologist, could find yourself up in a helicopter flying over the mountains doing desert bighorn sheep surveys and counting them from the air. Kind of scary because they tend to leave the doors off on the helicopter. So a little scary, but fun. It's not all fun, though. You also get to deal with invasive species such as bufflegrass, salt cedar, tumbleweeds, something called Kogan grass, which is an aggressive invasive species from Asia. You also have to deal with mammalian species, invasive species such as nutria, wild hogs, and rats. On Kiska Island, they have to trap rats that are predating goose nests in a reintroduction program there. So they have to trap the rats out. And you might find yourself, such as these gentlemen from the Gulf Coast refuges, going out and surveying oil spill damage, looking for oil spill damage. So it's not all fun and games. There are some not so fun parts to the job, but you could say that about every job, I think. So let's move on to the outdoor recreation planner. This position is responsible for designing, developing, and organizing all the public use programs on the refuge. You'd find yourself doing environmental education. You could be leading a canoe tour in the wetlands. You could be teaching kids how to hunt with archery. You could be hosting a fishing derby, a fishing tournament, teaching kids how to fish, or doing environmental education with the fire crew, showing young kids about fire and fire engines. Schoolyard habitats are another project. Now you get into the middle of this career, you find yourself working in a visitor center, developing exhibits and displays and signage, supervising the YCC crew, the Youth Conservation Summer Crew, and volunteers. A lot of refuges have very large volunteer programs, and the outdoor rec planner supervises those. Now, the pinnacle of this career is to actually be managing a wildlife refuge visitor center and having staff working for you in the visitor center. That's kind of the top end of the career on refuges. And you can move into regional office after that. So because people don't always obey the regulations when they come on refuges, we have refuge officers who patrol the refuge. They serve and protect the public. They check hunters and fishermen to make sure that they're obeying the regulations and properly licensed. You work with state and local game wardens, working cases with them. If you're on a border refuge, there's a good chance you'll work with Border Patrol and Customs on illegal immigrants and drug trafficking. So you get to operate a variety of equipment. Up in north in Vermont in the wintertime, their officers are on snow machines. In Alaska, you're out in a fixed wing float plane because it's such a long way to get to anywhere. And if you're up like at Elk Refuge, or you might be patrolling on horseback.
Hey, Mike, we have to wrap up. We're almost out of time.
Okay. So the last group I want to talk about is fire management. And we do a lot of burning in the refuges. And you can start out in this as a firefighter, 1 or 2, and you can, without a college degree, if you want to move up into the series, then to be a prescribed fire specialist, or to be an engine boss, or to be a FMO, you need to have at least a bachelor's degree or more. So they do a lot of burning on refuges, marshes, grasslands, and occasionally they get called off refuge to support interagency fires. For example, if the Forest Service has a big fire and they need lots of help, they'll call on refuge resources to come help that. And that's a whole nother ball game where you as an FMO could be on a big fire crew on a big national forest fire. So there's a lot of opportunities out on refuges, and I hope that some of you are interested in that. We always need good people. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Mike and Carl, for your time. Thank you, attendees. Have a great rest of your day.